This is Innovation Strategies, Region-Specific Policies and Technology, Plenary Panel. I'm a real fan of looking at things in a very large integrated assessment framework where one is considering not just the technology, but also the finances and the policy and the social economic aspects. And we're going to be talking here today in this panel about great innovations, things that are happening in the technology world, but then how do we, where do they fit? Do they fit? If you look at the big picture from the policy side, from the social side, the economic side, how they fit in within this region, other regions of the country, kind of get a vibrant debate going, and and also, of course, talk about how current happenings at the federal level with respect to resources are kind of hurting or slowing us down, and what are we going to be doing about it. So we have here, it's pretty exciting, we have a real chemist down there. You're a real chemist, right? I can make jokes about that because I got my PhD in chemistry about 50 years ago, so I feel obliged to, say you're a real chemist. And then we have a real social scientist in the middle here, Alexis. Yay, from NREL, and also an expert in photovoltaics. And then we have Mr. Policy himself, John. And also, myself and my husband, Dave, we're big supporters of Western Resource Advocates. They're the best group in town here regionally. So what we're going to do here is each of our panelists are going to have a few minutes to talk about their work and what their perspectives. These will be relatively short presentations because then we want to really delve into these questions that I was just mentioning. And that won't take too long either because really want to give all of you an opportunity to ask your questions that may be coming up already in your mind or come up as they're talking. So you've heard enough from me. Whoa. Mike, you're first up. Let's give him a round of applause. This is a great group.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always nice to sleep in my own bed and ride my bike to a conference. And I don't need the slide to show you how nice Boulder is. You're here. So about 12 years ago, I was trying to think about where to steer the solar cell research that my team was doing. And, we realized that with, things were going very well with silicon. The prices were dropping rapidly, and you could foresee that they would continue to drop. But then with so much of the cost tied up in glass, steel, installation, and land, we realized that we needed to drive the efficiency up so that for the same amount of glass and steel, and the same installation effort, you're just getting more power, more energy out of the system. And so we set out to make what we call hybrid tandems. We figured silicon is going to be pretty good for the bottom solar cell, but we needed a wider band gap semiconductor to go on top. When we started the work, there really wasn't anything attractive, nothing that we could put on silicon that would get us efficiency up over 30%. And then the metal halide perovskites came along. It's what we'd been waiting for. And we jumped on that right away. And here you can see the yellow line is the efficiency of silicon, so it's improved a little bit. And then blue is perovskites. It shot up very rapidly. It's at about 27. I think this might be the year where perovskites will catch silicon for single junction. But then if you put a perovskite on top of silicon, now I think the world record is about 34.5% efficiency. And as a rule of thumb, whatever you can get on a single cell maybe take 3 efficiency points off that, and that's probably what you'll get in panels. So I believe we see a fairly clear path to panels that are 31% efficiency. So that's going to be about 50% more power than silicon panels are currently producing. We're also, and we being a whole community, about 2,000 researchers around the world, we're trying to do all perovskite tandems with no silicon. And then it's all thin film. Also trying to particularly when you look at the geopolitical situation, trying to have a supply chain completely here in the United States. And just a brief update. The narrow gap cell there isn't quite as stable. A lot of the stability tests have been passed for the wider band gap perovskites, but there's still work to be done for the narrow. And the all perovskite tandems, I think, are at about 29%, and so it'll be interesting to see how far that goes. If you really want to know what the next thing will be, people are already trying triple junctions. Right now, the triple junction is not as efficient as the 2, but the potential is there for 40% efficient. And all of this is low cost. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you know that, with 3 5s, these numbers have been possible for a long time. But these are very low costs. Perovskite can be printed. These are examples of cells that, they look like they're just silicon cells, but these are perovskite silicon cells made by Oxford PV. Which is already selling panels. I think very small scale for now, but perovskites are a commercial product now. And then last thing I'll say, I think I'm the director of a DOE-funded consortium. It's a weird thing to say. It is a fact that we won a $9.2 million grant, and that we got off to a nice start. We're not quite sure what's going on right now and if we'll ever get paid again. But we were created to help American companies commercialize perovskite silicon tandems. 3 of the companies are Swift Solar, Beyond Silicon, and Tandem PV. And we have a diversity of approaches. 2 of the companies believe that the perovskite should be grown directly on the silicon wafer, whereas Tandem PV believes that the subcells should have their own electrodes. 2 of the companies deposit the perovskite from solution. They use slot die coating. Swift Solar evaporates it in the vapor phase. And then a team of us at universities and at NREL tackle the biggest challenges that those companies have identified, mostly having to do with stability and trying to demonstrate 28% power conversion efficiency at a scale of about 4 full-size wafers with essentially no degradation. And we hope we get our funding back and that that consortium can go. And I'll leave it at that, and later on I'll be happy, or I guess I'll take questions later, is that right? Yeah, so be happy to answer questions later on.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're off to a good start. Great. As introduced, my name's Alexis Pascaris. Can I take the microphone off? Okay. I'm a social scientist and subject matter expert with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Really excited to contribute to this discussion. I think it's really interesting. We're going to go from the solar cell scale to the landscape scale as we start to think about siting and different innovative practices when it comes to the types of solar projects we can build. How many of you are familiar with the concept of agrivoltaics? Awesome, cool. That's what I want to talk about today. But first, I want to just give you a big picture of our project. The INSPIRE project is the longest and largest coordinated effort in agrivoltaics research in the nation. We were originally funded by DOE in 2015, and we operate in 3-year cycles. Back in 2015, DOE helped us start asking questions about feasibility. Is this possible? And now fast forward to 2025, we're in the process of developing informational resources and really improving data and capabilities for the nation. So we have 24 field sites across the US, and NREL is our nation's coordinating body when it comes to agrivoltaic research. We have an incredible interdisciplinary team. I'm the social scientist. We have plant scientists, economic specialists. We have folks specializing in field work, international development. So I just wanted to give you a big picture of behind the premier agrivoltaics team in the US, we're just people who care about the world, who care about land stewardship, innovation, and we're trying to make this world a better place. So agrivoltaics 101. Choose your adventure. Agrivoltaics can look very different depending on where you are and what your needs are, especially the needs of the farmer. We identify agrivoltaics as the co-location of agricultural activity with solar panels. So in between the rows and underneath the panels, there's active agricultural production. We also distinguish that from ecovoltaics, which is pollinator habitat or pollinator-friendly solar, so native and non-invasive species that provide ecosystem service benefits. There's also grazing applications. Sheep grazing is very popular in the US, and we're starting to explore the potential for cattle co-location with solar. We have traditional utility scale solar in which you can utilize the space in between the rows for grazing, ecovoltaics, or crop production. If what we're seeing now as the market moves towards crop co-location is innovation in design. So this bottom row here, we're seeing panels being spaced out or elevated. And if you think of this in a gradient, so we have energy-centric solar. That's your traditional utility scale solar. Panels are low to the ground, they're packed in, high density, power production is the main goal. On the other end of the spectrum would be ag-centric solar, where the main goal is agricultural activity, but supporting the farm with that additional revenue and potential benefits from the microclimate of the solar. So there's this spectrum of ag-centric or energy-centric, and there's a lot of innovation happening in this space. I would say we're seeing a lot of really cool designs coming out of Europe, different market, different economics, but we're learning a lot. This is the current status of agrivoltaic deployment in the US. If you want to stay in real time, up to date on this, NREL is tracking and actively identifying currently operational projects in the US. So it's a little messy, but if you just type in NREL agrivoltaics, you'll come to our website, you can check out the map, and you can toggle for different types. So if you just want to see the grazing sites in the US, you can choose that. Just by looking at this, you can see a lot of patterns. Up in the Midwest, around Minnesota, it's covered in pollinator habitat. They have a strong voluntary program for pollinator habitat. Grazing is most popular in the Southeast, and we're starting to see crop co-location happening, but more at the community solar scale. So less than 5 megawatts is an ideal scale for co-locating with crops, as far as we've seen commercial success at this time. More geographic trends, just so you can understand what's happening and where. And I think what's interesting is if you overlay geographic trends and deployment with the policy landscape, you can see a little bit of correlation. So these are the known state policies for dual use solar. So I say dual use because that includes pollinator habitat and agrivoltaics. Massachusetts and New Jersey have a financial incentive. They're using a feed-in tariff to drive innovation in agrivoltaics. Places like New York and Illinois have bid preferences. So we're going to favor your project if you're offering or meeting agrivoltaic standards or goals. Colorado is home to an R&D program. So the Colorado Department of Agriculture is on its 3rd round of funding for agrivoltaics R&D. Small research grants, either focused on engagement or demonstration. And we're seeing what we anticipate is that CDA is going to utilize all the findings from this pilot program to inform a more formal policy program in the future. So there's lots happening at the state level. And we've been tracking technical and non-technical insights relevant to what are the key success factors? What are the things that go into making an agrivoltaics project meaningfully work for all stakeholders involved? So we're tracking that, and we developed a framework called the 5 C's of agrivoltaic success. So when thinking about developing a project, can we optimize the climatic conditions with the solar configuration and the type of crops we're producing? That has been the core focus of the scientific effort around agrivoltaics. If you go to the literature, it's really about climate, crops, and configuration. Those are really important things to optimize. But as we move towards scaling, we understand that compatibility with farming operations and the collaboration, the broader social context in which we're deploying these systems really matter. So we're kind of flipping the traditional kind of unidimensional framework of our 5 C's into this nested model because we want to encourage thinking about connectivity with social aspects and the legal agreements and the partnerships and all the things that make agrivoltaics projects successful. So this is the focus of my work. I just want to leave you with some resources. So if you want to learn more, if you have a potential project in mind, partnerships, research, or development, we have a whole getting started toolkit. Again, just NREL agrivoltaics, you'll find our getting started steps, different programs, informational resources. We're just really trying to improve data and capabilities for the nation. We also have a technical assistance program, free technical assistance with different experts at NREL helping you design, do shading analysis, work with local partners, and really help you get your project off the ground. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. It's good to see you all this morning. I want to talk about this in a little bit of a different, in a different frame. Obviously, over the last several years, we've had a much more favorable policy environment for the expansion of solar and other renewable energy technologies. This has really meant that there's been strong investment in clean energy, that there's been a federal environment that held the promise of more renewable energy incentivized through both the bipartisan infrastructure law and through the Inflation Reduction Act. And this included incentives for solar, for wind, for battery storage, for other types of renewable technology. In the current environment, I come here with 4 particular things on my mind. First, the severe threat of climate change and a warming climate. Second, the impending extinction crisis if we don't protect highest value habitat. Third, federal policies that favor and incentivize fossil fuel extraction as opposed to renewable energy. And fourth, renewable energy development that even as it has been incentivized has been too slow to meet the challenge of climate change. So the last 7 years, I think, can serve as a model for how we can move forward to create favorable policy environments in the future. Clean energy can serve the vast majority of our energy needs. We know this. The technology exists today to reduce emissions dramatically. Xcel Energy is already on path and has committed to a plan to reduce emissions by 85%, and to do that with 80% renewable energy resources. That plan's been approved by the Colorado PUC. So we have some sense of what's possible with even minimal deployment of renewable energy resources across one utility in our region here. Clean energy also brings serious investment to our communities. When you look just at utility scale investment in renewable energy over the last 7 years, we're talking about $70 billion invested in blue states and in red states alike. Of course, that was heavily incentivized by bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And we had a sense that we could meet the growing demand for electrification across the transportation and also the building sector with these new investments. These investments also created hundreds of thousands of jobs in our region, but of course the political ground has shifted. While clean energy has led to very substantial investment in states across the West, it's also really important to note that even if you look at these 4 states here, the investment has not been just in blue states. It's been across the region. What we know is that clean energy means jobs. There are far more jobs in the western region that WRA works in clean energy than there is in fossil fuel related employment. That's true in 5 of the 7 states that are listed here. And we know that that can be a true path breaker for policies in states that incentivize renewable energy just based on the jobs argument alone. But we also know that clean energy is cheaper. The economics are still competitive. They're not as good as without tax credits. That environment won't be as favorable, but still very attractive. Solar energy will still be, even without the incentives, the cheapest form of energy in most states in the nation. Solar plus battery storage, wind plus battery storage will still be competitive, even without the tax credits. So it is time for all of us to make the case more forcefully and taking advantage of these economic arguments, the job creation arguments, the investment arguments that we can throughout our states. We need to make the case not in opposition to conservationists like myself, but hand in hand with conservationists, that we can invest in clean energy in ways that advance our economies and that protect wildlife and sensitive habitat. So I want to say that clean energy is also the fastest and the most affordable way to meet new demands. Of course, there's a lot of conversation right now about AI and the energy that it will demand from data centers. Data center proposals are popping up around the country, certainly here in the West. There's no exception. And while many of those demands today and projections today are likely overinflated very substantially, this does present a new challenge. And so we have an opportunity through policy creation to ensure that new load, whether it is to fuel data centers, whether it is to fuel electrification of our transportation system or of the building system, is met by conditions that we establish through policies that ensure that new load is met by renewable energy, that new load protects communities, that new growth in electricity generation protects our communities, protects wildlife and habitat. We can do that through policy. We know that AI growth in data centers and in AI, we will need to power it, but now is the time to set the conditions under which these operators must operate. We cannot afford to go back to the non-solutions of building new gas plants, bringing on new fossil fuel capacity to meet this load growth need. There are certainly many big challenges in the policy environment, and I want to come back to the 4 things that I started with just to emphasize them. Climate change and a warming climate, the impending extinction crisis if we don't protect highest value habitat, federal policies that incentivize fossil fuels rather than clean energy, and renewable energy development that even in the best case scenario has been too slow to meet the need for that renewable energy. So we have to develop the renewable resources that we need, first by using and maximizing existing technologies, and through research and development in new and promising technologies like some of those that have been discussed this morning. Utilities are already showing that they can, with existing clean energy technology, meet 80% of our energy generation needs. So we have to ensure that we do this in ways that are affordable for people. We have to ensure that we protect sensitive habitat and wildlife, and we have to ensure that we protect ourselves from the most damaging impacts of climate change. The best way to do this is to replicate exactly what's happened in the past. That is to advance state-level policies that invest in renewables, that ensure that our utilities are taking advantage of existing technologies, and then figuring out how we incentivize those actions so that utilities are spurred to act faster to serve not only the power sector, but also the transportation and building sectors. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, all three of you. Wasn't this great? Let's applaud them again. This was really, really, I thought, very helpful. My mind is exploding, and I had some questions kind of up here, and some of them were already kind of answered. And I don't know. I think I want to mix it up and just open it up to everybody here, because I see there's some hands up already, and people are kind of looking anxious and want to share and ask more questions. What I would like us to do is go through the Q&A, but then about 5 minutes before our time is up, I'm going to put an end to our formal Q&A and then ask each of you to leave us with one or two very key takeaways that you would like the audience to go away with feeling empowered. We all want to feel empowered at the end of this. Okay, so let's see, lots of hands. Over there, let's just start there, and then go to Jill.
So this is a pointed question for Michael. Sorry about this, but I think Rich Stromberg, Equitable Solar Solutions, and I'm also a PhD student at University of Alaska Fairbanks. So perovskite's great technology. We should keep funding research and development. I'm really concerned that Oxford PV is selling product on the market. I do not buy their claim on their website that they pass all IEC reliability testing. All the manufacturers, or all the companies working on this development, why are they not sending their product to third-party testing labs to actually validate and test? Because they just don't trust it, and I will not recommend that product at this time until we see that kind of data. Thanks.
Yes, so in this country, we have the PACT Center at Sandia and NREL, and they are doing third-party testing, mostly for American researchers. It's at a pretty small scale. Those are not full-size panels. There's no American company making full-size panels, right now. And things come in stages, and in doing due diligence for investors, I've refined what I like to see, and there's 4 or 5 things, and you have to make sure they're being done all together. So I like to see the efficiency and the stability data, but not just once. I like to see what are the numbers day after day after day, and in a private setting where I'm not allowed to share the information and they're forced to show me the data. I say, I need to see all of the data, not just that you passed it. Are you passing it 99.99% of the time? And I do have information from various, companies that I can't share, and I would agree they are not getting 27% efficiency and passing the stability tests 99.99% of the time. They still have work to do to get there. And I would say we're on a good trajectory, though, because 4 years ago, the stability results, really didn't look good at all. But now, like in our consortium, it's a very comprehensive program. We look at mechanical stability, because the temperature swings causing the materials to expand and contract. That's what causes some of the failure. We look at electrochemical failure. We look at the partial shading problem. Yeah, Oxford PV is not completely there yet, and your caution, I think, is perfectly reasonable, but let's hope that maybe in 3 or 4 years, that it's not really just a pilot or a beta. You might call it beta testing is what we have at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And hopefully you'll be still getting all that money to continue the R&D, which is needed. So, okay, let's see, Jill.
So I think this is a question for Alexis, but maybe John might want to pitch in too. We have a large-scale solar project which is being hotly contested in the Santa Fe, New Mexico area. And for those of you who haven't had this experience, the level of disinformation is astounding, absolutely astounding. And a lot of it has to do with the destruction of habitat, the destruction of the soils. We're working with well, we're not working, but we're intending to have AES build a 100 megawatt solar project with storage. And because of the contentious arrangement that we've had for the last 3 years, we have not been able to have a conversation with the company about doing great things, better things for the community. We'd love to have a community benefits agreement, but we have diametrically opposed sides. Short question from that is, I wonder if, assuming a low bar of something like habitat protection, pollinator garden kind of stuff, as well as maybe your experience with, which I've read about simply protecting soils with a little bit of shading in a high desert environment. What's the low bar that we could expect for working with not the test case, but the average large-scale solar project in the West?
Yeah, I can start, and then I'd like to hear John's thoughts. Perfect case study example of an opportunity for us to maximize the co-benefits of solar, because I think in my experience doing some really deep dive analysis and what are the core factors that drive community opposition to solar, they rest on perceived negative economic impacts on the community, local and food systems, as well as perceived environmental impacts. So what I'm hearing from you is that that resonates for this community in particular. And we've started to see agrivoltaics as a way to reframe the narrative about large-scale solar development. We've seen communities, specifically here in Colorado, even a Delta County example in which a 100 megawatts and more project was originally rejected by the community on grounds of habitat destruction, et cetera. Same with your community in question. But after the developer proposed co-location with sheep, the rejection was overturned and that project is under construction. So it's every single project is unique because every community is unique, and there's going to be specific members into that in a vocal minority that have really meaningful concerns. And I think as you progress in your development project, you can have the opportunity to really understand what's driving their community values, what's meaningful to them. If you're saying we're going to throw sheep on here, well, first do your homework and see if sheep is even economically and relevant to that community. But to your question about low bar, I'd like to see a world where pollinator habitat is the standard utility scale practice. There's cost comparison to typical other low impact development practices. There's no great cost increase. It's going to take a couple of years to establish meaningful vegetation, but then we have all these ecosystem services that exist in perpetuity, and that's the story. So I think my long drawn out answer to you is co-benefits are meaningful, not only for the community in question that's going to host the project, but for us as an industry, when we talk about solar, it can do so much more than produce power.
Yeah, I'd add that we all know that we have to speed renewable energy development and deployment in order to meet our energy needs and to address climate change. And we have to do it at scale. And I believe that the best way to do that is to do it in partnership with conservation organizations that both work to avert the worst impacts of climate change and that are working to ensure that we're protecting habitat and species. I think negotiating principles up front between the solar industry, the wind industry, and conservationists holds the best promise for actually doing this, because I do think that the two constituencies together at a policy level can be very powerful in state legislative forums. And so we've been working along with many of our partners and some renewable energy developers to try to get agreement in advance about what's the definition of high priority habitat? How do we ensure that we're protecting those areas that are highest value? How do we speed renewable energy deployment and ensure that we can protect those areas at the same time? You know, if you look across the West, even with maximal renewable energy development, we're talking about a very small amount of land mass. And we can do that and protect valuable habitat at the same time. I think it requires real work up front. I think it requires a commitment to try to solve these problems together, and then going forward in policymaking forums to address these with some real standards and principles of agreement before we get to that place where each project becomes a flashpoint. That's still going to happen at some level. You know, we have county level governments that are going to weigh in on these things, but the more we can establish shared values around how we do this, and the more we can get that locked into state-based policies, I think the more success we're going to have.
Excellent. Okay. Next question. Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Peter Vandermersch, and I've been interested and involved with energy conservation since the early 70s. So the question regarding agrivoltaics that comes to mind is, has there been any optimization studies to determine what the best ratio is of ag land and solar panels? And what kinds of crops have turned out to be the best for this type of system?
Yeah, great questions. There's been a lot of optimization studies, mostly modeling, using model methods. And I think to that question, we need way more field data to validate those models. And each system is going to be very unique based on local context. So I'd like us to think, instead of like optimizing in terms of a ground cover ratio, standardizing that, and expecting that of a solar company, looking at each project as an opportunity to work really meaningfully with everyone involved. So it's going to look different depending on the agricultural practice. What type of equipment are they using? That's going to dictate panel height and row spacing and turn radius. So it's very place-based in terms of optimization. And I think that's exciting. There's a lot of, like, you can choose your own adventure when it comes to agrivoltaics, because it's not going to be one turnkey solution. And we're kind of working through learning what's best, what's working, what's a height that we can elevate to that doesn't really break the bank, but also leaves long-term flexibility for a partner. Let's say a farmer who's growing squash might want to change that in 10 years, and they probably will have to. So how can we design for adaptability in agricultural practices? When it comes to crops that we've seen successful in the US, leafy greens are really benefiting from the shade. I'd really encourage you all at Longmont. There's Jack's Solar Garden, which is not far from here. It's the nation's premier agrivoltaic research and community engagement site. They've seen above ground biomass increase, so like meat, and that sounds fancy, but that means like fruits are bigger. Doesn't mean there's more fruits, but that means the fruits are bigger. So the plants are investing more because they have the benefit from the shade. Down in hotter places like Arizona, tomatoes and peppers and sun-loving plants are actually benefiting from the shade because after a certain point, plants stop photosynthesizing and too much sun isn't valuable. It's actually can be hurtful. So we've seen negative impacts up at Colorado State University on like squash and nightshade, squash. We have collated all of this information, and I'd be happy to share those resources with you that kind of gives you a breakdown of how different plants are responding. But again, it's going to be very place-based. It's an interesting conversation.
Mark Thornblum, Kelolo Engineering out of Florida, and I have a question for you, Alexis, to follow up. I think I have lots of questions for you about this topic. I'm an engineer, so just fascinated with the technology, but we're talking, you're preaching to the choir here, to use an analogy there. And to so basically follow up on Jill's question, are there any resources that NREL, or that you are aware of, maybe outside of NREL, that can help when we are trying to propose, when we, the royal we, are trying to propose a project in a community, and then to go up against those that are hearing other information, you know, the fake news comments and stuff like that. It's not unique to us, and it's not necessarily, these aren't people that are out to attack solar. They might be being fed information by somebody, but it's not an attack. These are people in their community that are trying to something that they don't understand. And I saw the same thing when I was with DOE years and years ago when we were trying to cite the superconducting super collider, and we were going around the country and doing scoping meetings and public information meetings, and people were coming up with all sorts of fake news. You know, you're gonna kill my babies. Radiation is gonna, mutate people, and it was false information. But that's what they had heard or thought might be happening, and we didn't have good resources in between that. You know, at that time we didn't have good, independently validated, third-party, respected sources that we could respond to some of those questions from some farmer or some homeowner. Does NREL have any materials like that for those of us that are trying to move forward different solar projects to be able to counteract the fake news, for lack of a better description?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a resource library, a little bit more for a scientific audience. If you're looking for more community-based resources, I would point you to the AgriSolar Clearinghouse. It was a DOE-funded project. Lots of beautiful informational resources there for a more public-facing audience, as well as the American Solar Grazing Association. They have fact sheets that are really useful and kind of demonstrate the benefits, the trade-offs, and thinking about partnerships around solar grazing. And one of my biggest recommendations is working with your local extension. CSU will be publishing fact sheets, but beyond the publication of fact sheets or those materials, Extension is the outreach arm of your research institution, and there's regional hubs, there's that state level trust. They are the boots on the ground that interface between communities and researchers and the industry in some points. And I think having that third party neutral entity can really bring some credibility to those conversations. So there's resources, but there's also local people that can help with those conversations.
I like that. It kind of brings up another follow-up or supportive question to what you just said, brought to our attention, Mark. And that's how, you see our group here, we're quite diverse, a lot of people working on all aspects of solar, from advocacy to research. And are there some other ways that we could be better connecting and building, community connections? You mentioned about the conservation community with the policy community. Are there any other suggestions that any of you might want to throw out for the group here? Partnerships of other kinds. Is that triggering anything in your thoughts? And how can we better communicate? That's also another big question we're struggling with. You don't have to answer it now. I can circle back, but this is something I think we're all really concerned about. Okay, another question down there.
Good morning. I'm Nia from Harvard University, all the way from Maryland, DC. I'm an educator, a mother, an architect, and a citizen. I have 3 questions for 3 of you. The first one, as a consumer, the product of the solar, which you're saying, I believe your credibility and assume that it's perfect. My contention is, how long will it last compared to the regular panel, and what happens? I'm really concerned about the waste, right? So if you would answer that. I have for the person who talked about so wonderfully about agrovoltaics. I have a problem. That's why I said I'm a mother. The fruits I get are not nutritious. So have you done testing that the fruits you grow or the vegetables we grow under a solar panel is nutrient deficient or efficient, and it's not modified because of genes or genetics? Because what I don't want is, just because we want a solar panel to work, we're finding ways to make it work, right? I want to know how this loop is, and I would like some clarity on that. And the person who talked about AI, I loved your comment that the need for data centers is overstated. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so you asked about the lifetime of perovskite solar cells. The goal is certainly to have them last 25 years or longer. If they only last 10 years, that boost in efficiency just gets offset by that loss of lifetime, so the cost of electricity would not go down. So it's very important to get that lifetime, and it's interesting, all of the companies in the United States and a lot of the professors have agreed now that we should be testing at 85 degrees Celsius. So we do these accelerated tests under 1 sun illumination and 85 C. And we've done sophisticated analysis that shows if they go 2,000 hours under those conditions, which is a quarter of a year, then they should do very well 25 years outside. There's other tests as well. We have to temperature cycle it. But yeah, it's a very sophisticated, accelerated lifetime testing program aimed at proving that these cells will last for more than 25 years. And if they're not, then the product's not ready. It's not time for people to get it. And then you asked about end of life. There's about 1 gram of lead in a full-size panel, and so it is important that the panels be sent to a recycling facility where that lead can be properly removed. And I like to tell the students here, if you're looking for opportunities, keep this one in mind. The solar industry took off around 2010. The panels last about 25 years. So in general, in 2035, we need an industry to recycle solar panels. For what it's worth, there's 16 grams of lead in a silicon panel in the solder. And silver is valuable. And I would like to see the solar industry get to 2 to 3 terawatts of production per year, and we don't quite have enough silver to do that. And so the recovery of silver will be very important. So both for getting out things that are toxic and getting out things that are valuable, we really need to see a recycling industry for solar panels.
Michael, just clarification, it sounded like you said 16 grams of lead and 16 grams of silver in the module?
No, I meant lead.
Okay. 16 grams of lead.
It's in the solder.
You also said 1 gram of lead.
1 gram from perovskite.
Oh, okay, got it.
16 grams of lead is in solder. Yeah, and it, to be fair, it's extremely insoluble in the form of solder. It's a little more soluble in the form of perovskite, so it's not a perfectly fair. But a lot of people are freaking out over the gram of lead in the perovskite, and they don't seem concerned at all that there's been 16 grams of lead in the panels all the time.
Yeah, interesting questions. So your questions around like increased or decreased nutrients within the plants that are being grown within the solar array. Those are active research inquiries. And the fun part about crop research is that you need at least 3 years of field data to validate that. So I will be happy to share and be able to answer that more intelligently within a year or two. I have seen results that doing like blind taste studies, consumers found the agrivoltaic vegetables more tasty. And I think in this conversation about benefits with the produce, we are seeing a trend towards value-added products. So producers who are farming within solar arrays or producing honey from apiaries that were sited within the array are selling their products at a higher value. And I buy those products. I have solar-grown honey in my cupboards, and I like to vote for that. So I think there's an opportunity there to think about how can we create a niche market and a value add for producers who are going through the extra hurdles to work with this. And it's gonna be a bigger conversation. I think I'll raise it at the end when we talk about leaving with inspiration. I think there's a lot of untapped conversation, and I could talk to you for hours about how we could use solar as a vehicle to channel revenue into the agricultural sector, and how we can think about solar as a farm viability tool and a meaningful revenue diversification strategy for struggling farmers. So there's a lot there, but I'll unpack that more.
So on your question about growth in data centers and needing more power to fuel them, I'll tell you just a brief story. I was down in Arizona last year and met with several utility executives. And the utility executives were from different utilities. And each of them told us about their expectations of their need for growth in power generation to meet the demands of data centers and AI. And I will say right off the bat, utilities like to build stuff and they like to own stuff, right? So we all know that already. So they're like thinking of this as a real opportunity to build and own more stuff. And what became evident over the course of our conversations is that they'd been having direct conversations with data center developers, and data center developers are giving them, their estimate of how much power they're going to need and how much generation capacity they're going to need. And in doing so, the data center developers went to each of the 3 major utilities in Arizona. And so each of the 3 major utilities would kind of, chalk up how much they were going to need to feed this data. So, well, they went to all 3. And so each of the 3 utilities were giving us numbers for total data center needs that they anticipated, not in any way accounting for the fact that they're going to probably need a third of that at best, because the data center developers are probably already overestimating what their actual needs are going to be. And so as our team has looked around the 7 states that we operate in the West, we've seen this to be a common practice, is that utilities are counting, from a variety of different data center developers. Not all those data centers are going to get developed. Some are going to get developed, but not all of them are going to get developed. And certainly we shouldn't be tripling what the anticipated load growth is going to be needed to meet those new demands.
Excellent. We have a question back there.
Yes. So we're all very worried. As an industry, we're worried about a gram of lead because we're getting asked, what is your plan for recycling? The other industries are not getting asked about their plans. So I would like to hear, especially from everybody, and not just the panel, but everybody in here, and has anybody seen good policy about data centers? Because a lot of the data center work is done under NDA. They don't let you know. I did see one state, Ohio, actually had a plan that said, first of all, come with your own energy. Number 2, don't put stuff under NDA that we can't see. That's one of the problems that we all as citizens have. We don't know what they're doing. We're not allowed to know. I see this as a really dangerous time, and just a revival of fossil, and a time for us all as solar citizens to control some state policy and say, this is good policy, this is responsible policy, this is not.
John's going to answer
Yeah, our team just issued a report 2 weeks ago on data centers and conditions under which data centers should be allowed to move forward in states across the West. That has recommendations around water use. It has recommendations around use of renewable energy, exclusively renewable energy. It has recommendations around where those costs should be allocated, because they shouldn't be allocated to regular, to your average consumers to cover the cost of the wealthiest interests ever in the history of humankind. We should make sure that we're protecting habitat and wildlife. So there's a whole series of recommendations in that. If you go to our website, westernresources.org, it's pretty prominently featured on there. You should be able to find the report. It's got a lot of great information in there.
Another question? Oh, Ron? Or wait. Go ahead, Ron.
From 1980 to now, the migration of monarch butterflies to California is about 1% of what it was. We're losing our birds, our insects, our fish in the ocean. More than half of the mass of fish in the ocean is gone. And I wanted to have you speak a little bit about how agrivoltaics might be cultivating improved conditions for insects in particular.
Yeah, great question. Our friends at Argonne National Lab have really been diving into this and doing longitudinal studies on birds, insects, and the pollination efficiency. We're seeing increased floral abundance and increased insect abundance, so different diverse species of insects with greater visitation and greater floral abundance, as I said. So it really depends on place. This is a phenomenon we're seeing in the Midwest, where vegetation establishment is relatively easy. You don't need to irrigate for that. When we think about vegetation establishment in a dry, arid condition, it's going to be different. So I think it's a really rich question. And there's also studies around like, how does pollinator adjacent habitat to agricultural fields, is there any dynamic interaction between the pollination strips and increased visitation to agricultural products? There's a lot of rich interaction there. I wish I had more concrete national scale data to point to, but as we move forward in exploring the potential of agrivoltaics, I think that is going to continue to be an issue. Conservation aligned solar deployment, and so not just power, but power in alignment with ecosystem services. I think there's a lot.
You want to say anything? Okay.
I'm wondering if a lot of these PV fields are surrounded by tall chain link fences. Is there any way to allow animals like deer and antelope and others to share the land with PV?
Yeah. It depends. I will say we don't want to see PV impacting wildlife migration. And that's a phenomenon we've seen. I've seen smaller scale projects without fence, and I've seen smaller scale projects with agricultural fencing. So the typical low to the ground kind of classic Colorado wood fencing. That's a potential, but it's really place-based. Again, each county might have specific regulations around fencing. Our friends at Jack's Solar Garden often post lovely pictures of different animals that are nesting or passing through the array because there's no fence there. So I think creating corridors and habitat with solar is a place of interest. I know the Department of Energy has funding. It's a 4-year funding project called SolWeb, and different universities in partnership with Argonne specifically have been looking into this. There was a SolWeb 2, but we're not sure of the potential of that. There's a lot of proposed research specifically dedicated to wildlife habitat, migration, and ecosystem services. So we have a lot to learn.
Actually, this isn't quite a question, but we went on the tour of Jack's farm this week, And the lady who gave the tour mentioned that they had some sheep there at the time, and some ducks and stuff. But there, they mounted the solar panels at 2 different heights. They had a small section that was like sort of low to the ground, and then they had something where taller, I believe 6 feet. The panels are 6 feet above the ground. So if they're 6 feet above the ground, and she said the poles that support them are like solid steel, that would allow cultivation probably by a small tractor, and she said you could even have theoretically cattle, because those poles are sturdy enough that if they bumped against them and stuff, it wouldn't do any damage. So I think you could introduce animals, plants and animals, under the panels. So that's just what they sort of said at Jack's.
Thank you. Okay, so I think what we're going to do now is give our wonderful panelists a chance to leave us with some final thoughts. Mike, let's start with you.
Yeah, my final thought is that there will very likely be a next generation of solar cells, tandems, that will have over 30% efficiency. And I think I heard a lot today. There's concern about land use, and that will reduce the amount of land that's needed by a third.
Yeah, that's great. I think my concluding takeaways for you is we're all working in different places within the chain of solar. And I spend a lot of time thinking at the macro landscape scale and intersections with communities. And when I think about agrivoltaics, I hope that when you hear that word, you think co-benefits, and you think about meaningful economic benefits to rural agricultural communities. You think about changing the narrative around solar and increasing social acceptance of siting. Siting is going to be an issue that's technology agnostic, whether we're siting data centers, wind, solar. We need to be thinking about the place, the cultural values, the potential package of benefits that solar can deliver to host communities. And I think broadly, we as a solar community will just continue to find impact and resilience in our work as we start thinking more holistically about these issues.
It is a difficult time. That's the nicest word I can use for folks in the renewable energy industry and for folks that are fighting climate change and looking to protect people and communities and to protect habitat and wildlife. So I want to end on a note of hopefulness, though. Very substantial renewable energy development was spurred by state-based policies that established renewable energy standards in the early 2000s. That drove innovation, it drove investment, and it really made a difference in what happened in the development of renewable energy. Over 70% of locked-in carbon emissions reductions to date have come as the result of state and local action, not as the result of federal action. We in the states, we in our communities, we have tremendous power to innovate and to drive policies that can answer some of these critical questions we need to answer. And so get engaged in these forums where decisions about energy and about our communities and about protecting people are made. That's at the state and local level. I urge you to engage there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.